You know, we did the whole thing and looked at how the money had been used to buy out UBG as well. I was able to show that 700 million at the last minute, it was supposed to go to Petrosaudi and one of its subsidiaries to pay back the fictitious loan, but actually it went into a company called Goodstar. And Goodstar, I didn't have the documentation at that stage, but I did have a contract from somebody who purported to be the investment manager of Goodstar, who was hiring Patrick Marnie and Tariq Abeid and giving them a brokerage fee of $85 million for having helped by acting as a front in this deal. That was signed by Seatley Lim, who was Joe Low's known sidekick. In fact, the contract had Seat's mobile phone number on it, and I couldn't resist, so yeah, I just thought I'd try. I rang the mobile phone number, didn't answer. 2 minutes later, my phone rang back, and it was him. I said, "Oh, hello." He said, "Who's calling me?" I said, "Is that Seatley Lim?" He said, yes, what do you want? I said, "Oh, I'm from Sarawak Report, and I want to know if you were involved, if you're the investment manager for Goodstar." And that phone never went on again. Those are the moments we enjoy. The money got, well, you know, people actually, I think Najib wasn't expecting, he inherited this incredibly powerful position. And, you know, I think impunity has been what this has all been about. You know, they really thought that, you know, they could bulldoze their way through it, and to give them their due, they jolly well nearly did. I mean, nobody was covering this. None of the mainstream media, nobody was covering this. But there was a lot of criticism within the political establishment, and a lot of people were actually, fair to say, a lot of people were criticising the fact that, you know, nothing had come out of this Petrosaudi deal. And in the end, what they decided to do, they went through various sort of, you know, I can't go into the detail of it now, we can talk later, but they altered their relations and their relationship with Petrosaudi over about 2 years, largely in order to baffle the auditors and leave things out of the accounts, to be honest. But in the end, they decided that they were going to close down the deal. It was the best way they get out of it completely. And they alleged that they had actually been bought out of their joint venture deal for $2.3 billion. 1.83 billion went into the deal. Most of that actually was siphoned into Goodstar. And so they said, great, you know, Najib's a hero. He's made a fantastic profit out of this investment. We're not actually going to bring it back to Malaysia. We've invested it in a Cayman Island fund. It's very reputable. We're not going to give you the name of the fund. And no more questions, please. Being in Malaysia, that's where we stood in 2014. Well, I better race on a bit. Reaction to me having done that story was, well, I became famous in Malaysia. What can I say? Not because of me, but because of the way these people reacted. They pretty much decided if they could demonize me and demonize Sarawak Report, and make out we were a bunch of liars, you know, they could squash this story. And of course they had got the mainstream media churning this out, and it was quite touch and go, actually. I was very worried, you know, that I wasn't going to be able to make this story go anywhere. Petrosaudi was pouring money into threatening all the mainstream international financial press who were interested. And they were, you know, they were holding back. They didn't want to spend all that money, you know, fighting a really big company with lots of big lawyers. I was fine, you know, I just said, come and sue me, I've got nothing. And funnily enough, they didn't, because they knew I knew, and they couldn't go to court. But you know, the big papers were staying carefully away from the story. It got very good coverage on the online media from Malaysia Kini, the much lamented Malaysian insider, and that way the story kept bubbling in the in Malaysia. And meanwhile, I had taken overdose. I was being criticised a lot for not actually giving the material to the correct authorities and purely, you know, mentioning this on my blog. I had given all this material to the correct authorities on day one, and I was waiting to see if the regulators that I had gone to were going to act, and I was worried they wouldn't. It got very nasty. The red shirts got going, And I think any of you who've been in Malaysia watching the Malaysian news, you know, we can talk about all of that. Actually, someone sent me a whole lot of TV coverage of the time, which I'm glad I didn't see at the time. There are some quite amazing things that were put out. I just got on with the story, actually. And I, quite early on, that's another thing about being a journalist, actually. If you do an investigative thing and you bring out information, often people will then contact you and say, oh, you know, actually, I've got something on this. It might be useful, might be interesting. And I go, ooh. Somebody got in touch with me and they said, I've got a lot of information on this second deal. I don't know if that's interesting to you, but, you know, I've got all the bank account details of Kader Markabesi. So Kader Markabesi is the guy in the robe, second one on. He's the CEO, the real head guy at Abar was Kader Markabesi. He was the big hitter and had a lot of clout. He was a very, very powerful sovereign wealth manager in Abu Dhabi at that time, massive reputation. And in fact, the guy next to him is the Crown Prince, who was dragged over for this second ceremony. It was exactly the same scheme as the Good Star one. The same thing, state to state, investment by an Arab-friendly country, you know, Muslim, you know, affirmation in Malaysia. We're such good fellows in every way. And then, you know, you have, you know, great publicity and all that, and then, you know, sort of money just disappears and nothing happens. And this is exactly the same. There were two main stages of this relationship with Abar. One was the power purchase loans that were raised under the aegis of a joint venture. Well, there was a joint guarantee in this case from Abar in 2012, two $1.75 billion loans, supposedly to buy power plants that was going to, you know, produce some kind of revenue for the company. Half the money went immediately away. And then later in 2013, this particular, you said the 12th of March, was the day of this particular strategic partnership between Malaysia and Abu Dhabi, which was launched on the 12th of March. By the 19th of March, under the guise of that strategic partnership, which in fact Abu Dhabi never did anything, Najib had got Goldman Sachs to raise another $3 billion. That had been raised by the 19th of March, and by the 21st of March, 681 million had arrived in Najib's personal bank account in KL. And, you know, I was asking questions quite early on about the strange coincidence of those facts. And of course, that's exactly what happened. And he'd got that money into his account in order to fight the election, which he called very soon after. Now, the person who contacted me had alerted me to the fact that there were two sides to Kadam. There was the guy in the robe, and there was Kadam, the somewhat, well, very lewd nightclub guy, who was obsessed with a very different lifestyle. And Kadam had been spending money. That's his Hollywood mansion, one of the most expensive, I gather. And he'd been investing hugely in the lifestyle that he secretly loved, which was nightclubs. And within 18 months, Kadam had somehow found the money again. As a, you know, he's a salaried guy, works for a sovereign wealth fund. You know, probably quite good bonuses. But Hakkasan went from zero to being the biggest nightclub and restaurant state in the United States in 18 months. And they had to have a yacht as well, didn't he? That's the Topaz, which he was funding actually for Prince Mansour. So out of that, I had to be careful to begin with, because the bank accounts and details I got on Kadam had showed me that over $500 million had gone into his Edmund de Rothschild bank account in Luxembourg during the period of 2012, early 2013, as my informant had reminded me. That was just after those power purchase deals. Most of that money had come from an outfit called Blackstone Asia Real Estate Partners Limited. I thought, my goodness, you know, I knew the banks were involved. Is Blackstone involved in this? You know, I didn't know what to think. Well, you know, I didn't know the scheme at that time. But there was also very conveniently a 20 million payment from Goodstar. Ooh, a 20 million payment from Goodstar, which was the Petro-Saudi company, into the to this Kadam guy, who's in a completely different relationship with 1MDB, you know, a couple of years later. So I asked the question, and they got sacked from their Abu Dhabi jobs pretty much immediately. I'd been getting very little, you know, response in Malaysia. They were just denying everything, but actually Abu Dhabi acted immediately, if only because they were so infuriated by the various pictures I had of Kadam living it up in the nightclubs, I suspect. But Kadam is now in jail. I found out who owned Blackstone. It wasn't, of course, anything to do with the well-known company. It was to do with, it was a Jolo company. It was another company, like Goodstar, owned by Jolo. And that was one of his, you know, that was one of his techniques. He had a spread of offshore companies, you know, they all had wonderfully, deceptive names. So, you know, they were called Blackstone or Merrill, or, you know, so that there was an understanding that they were something they weren't. And, you know, it's a great idea until somebody rumbles it, and then you're so exposed, aren't you? Now, what happened in the early days of those exposés that I'd done was that you started getting investigations in Malaysia.